So I am Director of Cybersecurity for KPMG in Scotland. That doesn't mean that I manage our security, that's not what I do. I actually run the consultancy practice that helps our clients to manage their cybersecurity, hopefully very effectively, and keeps them out of the newspaper headlines. So that's what I do. What I'd like to cover tonight would be broadly that agenda, which hopefully is aligned to the brief that I got from John earlier on. John didn't mention cyber fatigue. That's from me, and we'll talk about that in a wee second. It is very much looking at cyber from a business perspective. And what does the boardroom think about cyber security? And then we're going to touch on privacy, or privacy, depending on how you care to pronounce that, and the general data protection regulation, which is something that is looming and is going to make a significant difference to the way businesses look after personal data. Is that okay?
Yeah.
We're ready for that.
Yeah.
If anyone has any questions, by the way, or any points that you would like to make, please do. I'm entirely happy that you just pitch in, and if we can have a bit of discussion as well, that would be fantastic. And you'd be very, very welcome to do that. I should probably just say something about my background as well, just before we kick off. I've been with KPMG now for 5 years, almost exactly 5 years. 5 years next month. Prior to that, I worked in a number of financial services companies, including RBS, Standard Life, where I was head of Group Internal Audit for a period of time, and I was head of information security at Tesco Bank immediately prior to my current role. So predominantly a financial services background, but with roles that have included all aspects of IT risk and control and security and audit over that period of time. I even admit to having been an auditor for quite a long period. Everyone's favourite, obviously, in your various businesses. So, combating cyber fatigue. Who's fed up listening to presentations and discussions about cyber? Anyone? Remember I mentioned interactive just a minute ago, remember that? No?
Not yet.
So not yet. Well, that's quite interesting, because we're increasingly seeing, particularly at the kind of upper echelons in our various companies that we deal with, in our client base, this notion that executives are getting tired of cyber. They're having the same conversations year after year, month after month, and so on. And for a long period of time now, it's all been about the sky falling in. Yes, it's all doom and gloom. There are so many threats out there that we can't fight against. So what we do is we spend lots of money and buy lots of IT solutions that are going to help us control our cyber risk so much better. And we do all of that, and then the next time we have a conversation at the boardroom table or with the Chief Information Security Officer or Head of Information Security, it's the same conversation. We need to do more. The threat's changing, and so on and so forth. And so we're getting this notion now coming through of cyber fatigue. We're getting a bit bored with it all. And if you happen to work in an organisation that's not yet suffered a serious breach, then many executives are saying, well, why are we doing all this? Are we spending too much? What are we buying next? And what's it for? And how does it help? I don't understand it. And that's quite a common picture. Of course, if you happen to work in one of those organisations that has had a material breach, it's a completely different conversation. It's, why didn't you do more about this? Why didn't you stop this from happening? Why didn't we know this was going to happen? And so I keep telling some of the people that I work with that to be a Chief Information Security Officer these days, or equivalent, it's a bit like playing a sport, where if you're exceptionally good at it, you might get a draw. But you really can't win. Whatever you do, you really can't win. So this notion of cyber fatigue does exist. There are ways to combat it, or to be conscious of it, and I think it's helpful in this discussion to at least be aware of reality. And there are some good external sources that help us understand the reality of cyber risk today. This is an extract from the NCA assessment 2016, the National Crime Agency. It's quite a chunky document. It's available online. You can go and pick it up. And these are just very short excerpts from the beginning of that report. And they say that a cyber attack that poses an existential threat to one or more major UK businesses is a realistic probability, not possibility, but a probability. Now this is not a notion. This is based on serious study of what's happening in the world of cyber security today and the potential impact on our businesses and on our economy. They also say the accelerating pace of technology and cyber criminal capability outpaces the UK's collective response to cybercrime. If you're only going to rely on statements like this, I think you can reasonably expect executives to say, well, what do we do? I mean, it almost sounds like an impossible situation, doesn't it? It almost sounds quite defeatist. And the last thing you want in your organisation is for senior executives on the board to kind of switch off to the topic on the grounds that it's all too hard, it's all too difficult, I can't really understand it, you need to get on and do something about it.
Is that not one of the biggest problems with the top of the tree in companies, is that they're not technically aware, they don't have somebody to explain it to them in simple language.
A great point. A great point. We're going to talk a wee bit more about that in just a second. I'm interested in your views. So it is a challenge, and I've said many times in public forums and in other presentations like this, the boardroom needs to have someone who can ask the right questions and who can challenge the information they're given in this space. And it can be quite difficult, but what we're seeing is the non-exec population going from one organisation to another these days and starting to do some of that. You know, we hear stories about what organisation A is doing. What does that mean for organisation B or organisation C? And how does that translate? And so they start to ask ever more challenging questions and prompt organisations B and C into further action. And we're seeing that a lot these days. So, very high level view from the NCA. What else has been happening? Well, if you look at the press, I always think there's a lot to be gained from looking at the various reports in the press. A few weeks ago, I had a look at what was going on just the BBC website over the space of 3 or 4 days, and I picked out 2 or 3 things that I thought were quite interesting and quite different compared to some of the things that we've read about previously. In this one, the story is talking about the Gabda's breach that they had. And what was interesting for me in this was the Forces IT security team had not previously seen the type of threat involved. So this is an organisation you would expect to protect their information reasonably well. The good news is that they are treating it very seriously, so thank goodness for that. But they had not seen the type of threat, despite their access, as you would imagine, to quite significant sources of threat information. They hadn't seen this kind of thing before. And I think this reinforces what we know about the fact that the threats are changing on a regular basis. The level of sophistication behind a lot of cyber attacks is increasing. And the next story talks a wee bit more about that as well. Again, this story was from the BBC website, and this sophisticated form of malware, doesn't really matter what it is, but in this case it was Project Sun, went undetected for 5 years at a string of organisations, allegedly. So the length of time between an attack being perpetrated and it being detected in some of the more sophisticated cases is also increasing. These things are becoming very difficult to detect for a whole variety of reasons, including the fact that malicious software now has the ability to look at the protection that you have in your environment, look at the versions of antivirus that you're running, various things like that, and disguise itself to stay undetected. Obviously, the longer it takes to detect a breach, a malicious software infestation, if you like, for your environment, the greater the impact is likely to be, particularly if it's this kind of thing, where it can steal files, log keystrokes, open backdoors, etc., 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 and do all of these things. So, level of sophistication increasing, complexity of attacks increasing, and potential for significant harm to be caused in various different ways increasing too. But I thought this was quite interesting too. I mean, the market out there for software vulnerabilities is actually pretty strong. Who in the room has spent any time looking for software vulnerabilities in the hope of making a fortune? Has anyone done that? Anyway, the market's there. So there's an incentive, isn't there? There's an incentive to go and find these things. But then, back to your point earlier on, what do you do if you find a significant vulnerability in commonly used software? Do you go to the manufacturer and see what you can get, up to a maximum of $200,000 in the case of Apple, allegedly? Or do you go elsewhere if you think you can actually make a bit more? There is a market out there, and there are incentives out there as well. So that's quite interesting. So who in here actually has responsibility for security in your organisation?
I've had in the past.
A few, small number. So who here works in an organisation where the information that you have access to is valuable to the extent that people might actually pay money to get their hands on it? So when I asked who's got information that might be valuable, it's pretty much everyone. There aren't many organisations out there that wouldn't have information that would be of some value to groups or to other companies. But I wonder if you know how valuable that information is if you were to try and market it. So that's the very latest information from the Underground Hacker Markets Report 2016. This is apparently the price list for various different items that you might want to get your hands on, were you of that persuasion. And what I also found quite interesting here was it's not all about information as it is in the here, for example, on a MasterCard information and so on. But if you come down to things like DDoS attack, $5 to $10 per hour. So one, that's quite cheap, and two, it's a managed service. You don't even really need to get that involved. You just need to know where to go to ask for a bit of help. So I mean, the point here is, the markets are out there. So for those with malicious intent, money can be made in a whole variety of different ways. So that's kind of what's going on. But the point here is, how do we get over the cyber fatigue? Right? Because this is reality. How do you get senior people in your organisation to accept that reality and how it applies to them? Because still today, many organisations, people that I talk to in many organisations, say, we'll never be a target. Who would target us? Is there anyone here who works in a company that hasn't had either or both of a ransomware attack and a CEO fraud type email attack? Are you familiar with these?
Yeah.
CEO attack. They happen all the time.
All the time. So there's barely an organisation I would speak to that haven't had both of those in the course of the last 12 months. Is everybody familiar with what I'm talking about? Everybody knows a ransomware attack?
Yeah.
Yeah? Where your data, a specific database or something's encrypted and you have to pay a penalty to get access to your data again. But also the CEO fraud is typically where a well-crafted email is sent to a senior finance person inside the organisation. It purports to come from the CEO. It's so well crafted, it not only spoofs his email address, but actually includes some information that would lead most people to believe that that's who it's come from. Usually information that's been gleaned from social media or something like that. So, we did a piece of work in the United States very, very recently. There is a document which came out. I can send it to you if anyone's interested, and it actually talks about cyber fatigue. And these are the 5 steps that we would recommend to help combat cyber fatigue. Firstly, make measured investments in cyber capabilities based on risk. In the world, and people will be offended by what I'm about to say, please try not to be, but I know IT departments and IT security professionals love buying toys, right? They do, it's a fact. You go to conferences, you get absolutely bombarded by all the product vendors saying, our tool is better than anyone else's, it's better than anything you've got today, it'll last forever, and it'll prevent everything in the world from happening, and you've got to have one, and it's quite hard sometimes to say no. What we're talking about here is only investing where, on a risk-informed basis, it's the right thing to do, you can articulate why you're doing it, you're clear about what the benefit's going to be, and you can talk about that in business terms. Second point here is regularly measure the effectiveness of your security investments. So if you're going to spend some money, it's got to be for some kind of return. Some organisations like lots of detail around that measurement. Others like quite a high level view based on some high level risk appetite statements, for example. So it really depends what works in your organisation. But do measure the effectiveness. Because again, I can think of a bank in the central belt of Scotland who have invested quite significantly in IT security products over the last 2 or 3 years. The reality is, and it's dawned on them now, that they're getting no significant benefit from that investment. Why? Because they bought the tool on the basis of it having fantastic capability, which it probably has. But what they haven't done is ever implement it and configure it in a way that derives that benefit. So they've literally bought a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Third point is develop and align the right cyber risk management model. So how are you going to talk about cyber risk within the organisation? How do you put this into a language that can be understood at senior levels? There's many ways to do it, and we can talk a wee bit more about some of that in a moment. Update your model to reflect emerging threats. It is a world that's changing. So I talk to chief risk officers, for example, who have got a whole variety, typically, especially in financial services, have got a whole variety of risk disciplines to get their head around. Some of them, like financial risk, I think, are pretty mature. Financial risks are typically very well understood. And so therefore we understand what the risks are, what affects those risks, how to mitigate those risks. And if you track against those mitigants, then you pretty much know that you can provide a level of comfort and that you understand how exposed you are. In my view, in the world of cyber security, it's a risk that is dynamic and that's changing all of the time. There's a real arms race, we know that, when it comes to the type of malicious software attacks that are going on, for example. But also the motivations are changing. And remember, any attack really needs 3 components. It needs an attacker, it needs an asset or assets of some description that they want to attack, and it needs motivation. Why are you doing it? It's not all about stealing data. It's not all about DDoS attacks. There can be a whole variety of different motivators. And so long as these things are changing, the risk itself is changing. And so therefore, whatever cyber risk model you operate needs to accommodate those things and be flexible enough to work with them. And then fifthly, build and promote a risk-aligned security organisation. And we'll come to this in a few moments. But what we are seeing is a bit of a shift away from compliance-based security, so built around the ISO model or the NIST model, whatever model you want to choose, to much more of a risk-based approach to security. And really understanding much more some of the key factors that we'll go on and talk about, I think, just in a second, which is right here. So, this is a very simple model, and this is one that we have found very effective when it comes to opening up that dialogue, around the boardroom table. One, do we understand the threat, and can you articulate the threats in fairly simple terms? So 0 day would be potentially one of those threats. Do you understand what you're trying to protect and why? I think for too long we've been trying to protect everything all of the time. Far better to take a step back, I believe, and think about the assets in terms of the information, data, and systems, and what value they have to the organisation, or potentially even to others. Then articulate what the impact of a successful threat against those assets might be, threat event against those assets, and actually talk in terms that would be familiar to senior people in the organisation. So if you can link this impact to corporate objectives, what are the underlying objectives that will support your strategy for the next 12 months, 3 years, 5 years? And talk in those terms about things like market value, share price, reputation, competitive advantage, etc. Then suddenly you get people who are very, very interested in what this actually means. And if you can add to that, this is like the cherry on top of the icing, pretty much at the end, but I still think it's very, very important. What business benefits can be derived from doing cyber risk management very, very well? Then you've got them doubly interested. Now, more and more organisations are going for certification, for example. Not everyone needs certification by any stretch of the imagination, but what we are seeing are increasing demands in the supply chain to be able to demonstrate that your security arrangements are effective, that they're both adequate and effective. I don't know if anyone here is experiencing that, but it's been something that has been prevalent in financial services for a long time. It's now definitely migrating at pace into retail, into manufacturing, into oil and gas as well, as a matter of fact. And this is all about recognising the threats that come through the supply chain.
Is there any evidence that that would act as a spur to a goal to a would-be hacker to try harder to get into one of those companies that's up there saying we have the best uncrackable cybersecurity amongst our competitors? And say, well, I'll show you. Is there any evidence that drives the kind of the project?
There aren't all that many organisations that would publicly say we are the best, we are fantastic. This is normally about sort of commercial gain between organisations. Very few, I think. I mean, other than banks saying, we take care of our customers and offer a whole bunch of guidance on their websites around how their customers can actually protect themselves. There's no one really publicly goes out and says that kind of thing. I've actually spoken to an investment company based in Edinburgh who were on the verge of doing it. We actually counselled against it for that very reason. It's much more about developing relationships with your business partners. And so if for example, you are a supplier of some kind of services to a larger organisation, and we've seen this with the oil and gas majors, for example, it's entirely possible that the major is going to ask the suppliers what their arrangements are and how they evidence that. because there are patterns and trends around the supply chain being used by hackers to get to their main target. That's a fact.
This is also in the topics like cloud computing, where you don't get to audit the cloud computing companies' servers, but you get to see all the certification that they have,
Yeah.
and maybe their published audit results as well.
Yes, indeed. And there's a whole variety of schemes out there to help with that now. I don't know if you've heard of Cyber Essentials, and there's CREST, there's Cyber Essentials Plus, there's the government 10 steps to cyber security. There's many different schemes out there which are actually very pragmatic, in some cases really quite simple, that focus, in the case of Cyber Essentials, on only really 5 control areas, and can actually be achieved through self-assessment as much as external testing and so on. So there's various different things that different resources, if you like, are available to you if that's important. At the higher end, of course, some organisations are taking a much more robust approach. And if you enter into a contract with them, it's quite possible that they will expect to be able to come and audit you, potentially even use a third party to come and conduct that audit you against specific standards, or using an assurance framework like SOC 2 or something like that. Anyway, these are some of the key components, and without getting into this in any great depth, some of the assets at risk, or understanding your assets at risk, is, it's obviously an important aspect of that model, but who actually takes the time to go through and do that? So has your organisation done that? So the most important assets of the organisation in terms of data and in terms of systems, what value they have and what the impact would be in the event of an incident. Is that something you've done? Have you created a register of assets? So these are the kind of things that, obviously you want to prevent. Some of them are about, information or data loss. Other ones are about continuity of service. Others are about ensuring the continuing accuracy of the information that's available. But it's certainly an exercise that most organisations that I've dealt with have found very interesting. You actually learn quite a lot through that exercise when you genuinely try and prioritise these assets to value to the business. In terms of the threats, we've been talking about these things, these threats for some years now. Again, the motivations, or typical motivations, are listed there. Is that a helicopter going over there or something, is it? Guys, I'm used to that. I'm not entirely used to that. And again, it's quite interesting as you go through the threats, trying to work out what are not the theoretical threats, but genuinely the most likely threats to affect your organisation. When you go through that exercise, there's quite a learning takes place. And if you do it on the basis of having identified the key assets and put a value against them, it really does help guide your thinking. And if you haven't considered that, and if you've got any responsibility at all for security, I'd encourage you to try it and see what you find. And then, of course, putting the impact of all of that into language that the organisation can understand is very, very helpful. So improving this dialogue at senior levels in the organisation. So is it about financial loss? Is it about CEO exposure, for example? Is it about loss of competitive advantage? And so on and so forth. The more, as I said earlier on, you can link these issues into the corporate goals and objectives, the more interest, the more engagement you're likely to get at senior levels in the organisation. Does that all make sense? Pretty straightforward, I think. Yeah. Are we okay with that? Okay. Now, these, I'm not going to go through this in a whole load of detail, but this for me is a relatively basic, relatively simple picture of some of the questions that should be asked around security and some of the capabilities that we'd expect to be in place for pretty much any commercial organisation. Would you say these questions are ones that get asked in your company? Yes or no?
I would say who's in charge is probably one of the biggest questions. What gets asked at the top of the group, because they're not always clear as to whose responsibility it would be.
So unless there's very clear accounting, everyone familiar with the RACI model? Responsibility, you know, who's responsible, who's accountable, who do you consult, who do you inform? I think it's absolutely critical in the world of security that responsibilities, accountabilities are absolutely clear. Very, very important. And if you're in a situation where you do have many people who think that they are responsible and you haven't got that level of clarity, confusion will reign. And the worst possible time for that confusion to reign is when you actually have an incident of some description. You're trying to make decisions very quickly. You're wondering who to inform. You're wondering who to consult with. It's a very difficult situation, without a shadow of a doubt. So this is the simple version. All right. So if these questions are not being asked in your organisation, it'd be worth doing something about that. I would argue pretty much for every organisation represented here. If you went to a slightly more advanced position, then you might be asking some of these questions, and you might be looking at some of these capabilities as being more appropriate for the organisation. Is there anything there that surprises you?
One thing, I think, with small companies, small businesses tend to outsource their IT operations in their entirety.
Yes.
And in fact, they haven't got a clue in many cases. They know their business,
Yes.
but they haven't got a clue about IT. And it depends who you outsource to, of course, how much they're asking these questions, because they don't share the same kind of liabilities as the company that employs them.
Yeah, so I did some work with a financial services company in Edinburgh who were in exactly that position. They allowed the IT manager to go and set up this outsource agreement. We were asked by Internal Audit to go and have a look at that agreement, and specifically to have a look at the security arrangements that were in place. They thought they were being very well secured, but there was a huge element, you know, that control that everybody talks about called trust. Yeah, we trust this organisation know what they're doing, and will be doing it to a high standard. Of course, it's not a control at all, and that was exactly what we found. However, what was interesting was when we went to the supplier and asked them about the levels, because all these controls can be applied at many different levels, and it costs you more to move to a higher level, etc., etc. When we asked them why the service was being provided at those levels and in that way, which was extremely basic, they said, well, no one's asked us for anything else. So we're just given, you know, they haven't asked us for anything. But there's nothing in the contract about that. No, we know. They said, we knew, and, you know, but nobody asked the question.
My experience is of some management is you go out and you buy a fleet of transit vans.
Yep.
You expect them to arrive on day one and work. You don't expect them to be a security risk.
Yep.
You go out and you buy an IT system, you expect it to work on day one, and you don't expect it to fail.
Yep.
I think they tend to compartmentalise things as capital assets,
Yep.
whatever they are. That's the end of it. Wash their hands of it.
Indeed.
But I take it that company would at least try to give some indication of, hey, you've got the basic level of security here to the IT manager. The question is that IT manager going back to say, oh, we actually need more? Or does he not understand what his assets and risks are at the end of the day? Because if he's just taking the basic level, that's fine. Maybe that's all he wanted.
So
you're going in and say, well,
so
no, you needed more.
So the issue was they didn't even know they were getting the basic level. They didn't know what that included or it didn't include. They hadn't specified anything in the contract specifically around security at that, you know, with that provider. So what they were getting was just like a default level of service. It was absolutely basic. And even although, very quickly, even although the provider realised that they probably needed more, but no one had asked the question, and that nothing was in the contract specifying what they did want, they didn't raise it. They could have actually been making a bit more money simply by asking the question. Moving on very, very quickly, I mean, these are some of the slightly higher level questions that could be asked. How do we detect intrusions? Because security is not all about prevention. I'm sure we pretty much know that now, don't we? It's not all about prevention, it's very much about detection, which is becoming increasingly difficult, and it's also very much about recovery. And most mature security organisations these days are pretty much looking at those three areas in equal measure.
When you say recovery, you're talking about them as an operation, I take it. So in other words, recovering the assets or recovering the data, whatever they've been breached, or they're looking to resolve.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the things is, I'm sure you're going to touch on, but I think is that the biggest issue is it's like anything, there's always going to be crime. So you have to have a level of acceptance it's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's more to do how you respond.
Yes.
Like how we're going to catch these guys. Like for every cybercrime, how many guys actually caught? I don't
Very few.
I don't know what the percentage is.
Yeah,
And I
very
think if
few.
we can get to that level of prevention,
Yep.
it would be better than a cure, but I suppose it's a long way off.
Yeah. So you use the term response. A good way to think about it would be in terms of response. So when we actually do suffer some kind of an incident, whether it be one that's initiated internally or one that's initiated externally, whether it be malicious or accidental, if we have an incident, how do we respond to that? And how do we recover back to a stable position, whatever that might entail? Now, increasingly, companies are spending time and effort in not only working out the threat scenarios and what their impact could be, but are actually rehearsing the response should those threat scenarios arise. Yeah? So, if you think in terms of a third prevention, a third detection, which is difficult, I keep emphasising that, and a third response and recover, that is probably a sensible way to think about your risk and to use your limited resources to good effect. Okay, if you wanted to get a bit more advanced, depends on what sort of an organisation you're working in, what the appetite is for all of this. But things like return on investment we mentioned earlier on. In a small organisation, a small team, it's very hard to get the space and time to really have a look at that. What about building a cyber resilient organisation? How much effort is going on outside of IT in the wider business world within your own company, where the number one weakness continues to be people? What's happening with all of that? How do we pool and share intelligence? This is actually happening today. The big banks, for example, are sharing intelligence and actually sharing incident information in near real time as well. So working as a community and working with law enforcement to make life really difficult for the attackers, because probably the biggest threat source continues to be the financial criminals. You know, the guys that are trying to make money and who typically go after banks because that's one, that's where the money is. That's it. That's where the money is. And so these capabilities now start to come in play once you get to that kind of level and that stage of maturity. Okay, that there, by the way, taking the offensive, disrupting cybercrime, that's a report that KPMG issued in conjunction with BT. That's actually available. I think you can get it off the UK website. If anybody wants a copy, let me know and I'll get you a copy as well. Okay, who's familiar with that kind of a diagram there? People have seen that? A few nodding heads. That's a typical risk picture, right? So risk professionals or audit professionals would typically use a simple grid picture like that to show the impact and the likelihood of a risk event occurring. Where the impact goes higher and the likelihood goes higher, you get into that red space at the top right, and that allows you to prioritise pretty much where you put your effort. Either where you go and do more auditing to find out really what's going on, how effective the controls are, or in the world of security, where you might want to put your limited effort and limited budget to best effect. Now, I actually read something in the last few days from a security professional who said, we're fed up looking at risk pictures, that's not the way to do it. We can be much more scientific, and we should be able to tell whether the introduction of a new control moves us from a 93% impact likelihood down to an 87%, and all this kind of stuff. To be quite honest, most organisations that I know of have got nowhere near that level of resource to commit to analysing all the risk and control data to that granular level. This is not a bad high-level picture. If you were to use this in a board pack and say, for security risk X, that's our gross position. But if you support our programme and we implement this control and then monitor it effectively thereafter, that'll bring us to that position. And given that this line represents our cyber risk appetite, that would be enough. Not to say it's never going to happen, not to say that it wouldn't have any impact, but it brings us within our risk appetite. We think this is a sensible thing to do. And likewise, by mapping the other cyber risk events. It's a simple diagram, but it actually helps people, I think. Yes?
And do you have advice on that second point, aligning with other business activities? Because the tighter security gets, it could impact on business activities. So at what level should that assessment, that balance be made?
Engagement with the business is vitally important. So if, for example, you live in an organisation where, I don't know, you have to have a sales force out using laptops all of the time, and you make it impossible for them to use their laptop in non-office environments, then that's not going to work, is it? So business engagement is really important. Security measures that you design and implement have got to work with the business. I am a believer, KPMG are believers in, it's not about what you can't do in the world of security, it's about what you can do. There's really no business problem, I don't think, that means you can't find a security solution to do it in an appropriate way within your, that business environment. There are many different ways to achieve the same objective. There are controls that can work in concert with each other. There are compensating controls, so if one control can't be strengthened, perhaps another one can, to help you improve the risk position and get yourself inside your risk appetite, etc. But there has to be strong business engagement. No security function, I don't think, should be working in isolation, just imposing controls of the organisation without understanding what the impact could be.
And do you find that engagement tends to happen at board level, or are there particular places in an organisation where that engagement between...
Typically further down the tree, the people who operationally are responsible for security, and who design these controls prior to implementation, are really the people who should be engaging with other parts of the business, I think. If you've got a head of information security or a chief information security officer, they would normally liaise with their various counterparts on, what they plan to do. But if you can articulate risk in any way, then you want to be doing that in business terms, don't you? You don't just want to be articulating the risk in terms of a threat, but you want to be articulating it in terms of a threat and the business impact that's going to arise from that threat. And then get to a sensible position on how you might improve the control to mitigate that threat as a result. So it has got to be aligned with other business activities. You often have to embed within business processes so that security is not something that's happening out here in isolation. And it's all got to be, as we said earlier on, dynamic and responsive to change. And then, not to go into this in any detail at all, but I think this model, very simple model again, is quite helpful as a cyber risk framework. There are foundations which include ownership that we're talking about earlier on. Understanding who's accountable, not only in terms of the ownership role, but throughout the business. Who's accountable for executing certain controls in any business process in the organisation. Consistent policy throughout the organisation, depending on how complex and international you happen to be, and having some level of funding and sponsorship. You have to have an understanding of what you're setting out to achieve and how that might be achieved. You need planning and control, and then you need to be able to implement, not only in a technological way, but including people and processes as we were just saying. It's quite a simple model, but actually it's not bad if you are responsible for security and you want to take a step back and say, we're doing all the right things. Asking whether you're doing something sensible in each one of these boxes is not a bad sense check, we've found. Any thoughts or questions on that? I do need to quickly talk about GDPR as well. Is that all right? Okay. Okay. Who's heard of GDPR? Just so I know, everyone. Pretty much, almost everyone. Okay, that's good. Does anyone have responsibility for privacy in their organisation? Well, you know, is anyone accountable for ensuring compliance with GDPR? No? No one. Okay. So very, very quickly then, we see privacy in these terms. And we use this model to show that there's a very clear relationship between identity, so individuals in your organisation, what you can do, cyber security, which is all the stuff that we're just talking about, and privacy. And they do intersect. So some of the controls in the cyber world will be very relevant from a privacy standpoint. But privacy legislation comes at it from a different angle. The legislation comes at it from the rights of the individual. So it's not about control frameworks. It's about the rights of the individual. The most relevant legislation in the UK today is Data Protection Act. I'm sure we're reasonably familiar with that. Indeed. So the GDPR comes into force, I think, on the 25th of May 2018. It has been passed. It will come into force on that date, and we know what the regulation says. Now, I emphasise that because we don't know everything about how that translates into specific requirements in every circumstance.
What are the thoughts on how Brexit will affect that? Obviously, it's EU legislation. I imagine the short answer will take it on and think about it when it's in, but I mean, are you aware of any other?
Yes, I am. So we almost certainly will still be part of Europe, and so it will apply. We think, you know, it's going to be until the end of 2018 at least, probably, before we actually come out. And the second thing is the Information Commissioner, who will be the regulatory body within the UK, has said in unequivocal terms that even if there's some magic backdoor, we will have an equivalent. So we'll either have the GDPR in its current form, or we will have an equivalent that will be based on that area. So the overriding message from the Information Commissioner is get to work on this and be ready to comply with this. Anyone who is sitting back assuming that things might change is mistaken, because the regulator is already working hard on having GDPR in. At this point in time, we think that's the most likely outcome. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. Okay. Not going to go through all of this, but this is not a bad summary, this and the next slide, of what the current law is and what difference arises under GDPR. I'm assuming that we're all aware of the penalties and the likely penalty implications, are we? No? So today, under Data Protection Act, maximum penalty is £500,000. And in fact, the largest fine issued under the Act was imposed very, very recently, in the last couple of weeks. Against whom? TalkTalk, 400,000. And I think it was, you know, if it's paid quickly, that will be slightly less than that. So that's the maximum penalty. Under GDPR, the maximum penalty could be up to 4% of global turnover, or 20 million euro, whichever is higher. So that's a significant change, right? So if you are a big international bank and you're worried about a £500,000 fine, barely a drop in the ocean. If suddenly you can be fined 4% of mobile turnover, that's a whole different ballgame. So chief risk officers, compliance officers in many large international organisations are very, very attuned to this. So what else would I point to here? In the world of IT, I think this, believe it or not, is going to be quite significant. You might not be responsible for the breach notification, but there's every chance that you're going to have to provide the information which allows that breach notification to be made reliably. Now, in my experience, notifications that have gone to the Information Commissioner could typically be measured in terms of weeks from the event, when that event occurred. The new requirement is to report to the regulator within 72 hours. Now, that will not be to say, looks like we've had a breach of some kind, right? That will be, we've had a breach, this is how it happened, to the best of our knowledge. These are the individuals or the records that have been affected. This is what we're doing about it today. Here's our plan going forward. Here's when I'll next be able to give you a reliable update, and so on and so forth. That's quite. I think that's quite stretching. Don't you think that's stretching within 72 hours?
Given that some companies find it very difficult to actually realise that they've breached, that would be quite difficult.
It would be quite difficult, absolutely and utterly.
Is that working hours?
Well, we're now into debates, and I've been involved in several of these debates now. So when does the breach get identified? Right, so that's 72 hours from the breach being identified. So what's identified mean? Is that a customer phoning up saying there's something wrong with my record?
That's typically been the method of companies finding out, is they find out from a third party that there's been a breach occurring,
yeah.
And that's always kind of concerning.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. But we're then, you see, we're then into that grey space where we suspect something might have occurred, but actually we need to investigate it to know.
yes.
Yeah. So at what point does that actually become a reportable event? And the obvious answer here is, of course, that's not 100% clear. We expect more guidance to come out on that kind of thing. But in order to be able to do that reliably, you are, whether or not you actually have an inventory, you're going to have to know where your personal data is, aren't you? And that's not always simple. You would think, well, yes, sorry.
Does that apply to data losses as well as privacy breaches?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. So, shortly after Talk, I'm aware of a company in the Central Belt who, quite rightly, at their risk committee, because they run a regular risk committee covering all the risks, they were, the responsible individual was asked, is all our customer data encrypted? That's what they were asked. Not an unreasonable question. At the same time, they had a program running, quite a sizable program with consultants involved to find all their customer data, because they didn't know where it all was. Right? This is a major organisation, a household name organisation. It's not always as simple as you might imagine. So we're working with a large retailer based in the UK at the moment, doing data mapping for this, right, for GDPR purposes. And they are getting surprises coming out. And what's quite typical actually is that, you know, particularly in the world of IT, I hear people say, I know what my core systems are. I know what data is held there. I know what controls are being applied. But if you're in a large organisation, or an organisation, for example, that's grown by acquisition, where you get multiple IT functions, multiple business units across several geographies, it's quite hard sometimes to know where all that information is. And that's before you even get into business units taking extracts of information for marketing purposes and for all sorts of other purposes. And getting back to the point about who knows where all of it, who's responsible for knowing where all of this is in all circumstances, so that if we do have a breach, we'll be able to very quickly say where that information came from. Because all you might hear about is this customer data has landed on this website over here, or it's been handed to this journalist. Where did it come from? Was it one of these core systems? Was it a satellite system? Was it a different business unit? Was it a third-party supplier to your company? Where did it come from? So unless you've got the data mapped out, you know how that personal data gets into the company, what happens with it, where it goes to, and how it's protected on that journey, you might struggle. And these are some of the other points that I just wanted to share with you. Are you aware of the data subject's rights? The right to portability and the right to erasure. You heard about that? People from the NHS know all about that. So, for anyone who doesn't, imagine that you want to move now from one energy supplier to another, or from one bank to another. Under the GDPR, you will have the right to go request the information that organisation A holds on you so that you can transport it to organisation B, and they have to be able to provide that to you in an agreeable format. I can imagine some large organisations with legacy systems, thinking maybe more in the banking space now, where since the financial crash 2008, have cut back and cut back and cut back on their workforce, who maybe didn't have all those legacy systems as well documented as perhaps they should have done, might find some of this stuff quite difficult. Right? So where is all your data, and how do I get hold of it? What mechanisms do I use to get hold of it? How do I extract it? And what does that mean for the functionality upon which that data forms part of?
How general is that data portability? I mean, could I go to Asda and ask for all my data from Asda so I can give it to Tesco? I mean,
theoretically, yes.
Wow.
Theoretically.
But how are you going to enforce this?
Sorry?
How is it going to be enforced?
How is it going to be enforced?
Yeah, and how do you find out if all these breaches are reported? Or...
It's a very good question. So, we think the Information Commissioner is going to have a big challenge here in terms of enforcement. We think they are probably going to be, or a large part of their resources is going to be consumed in dealing with large organisations and potential issues and breaches and the like. To actually get around the wider population and police this, I think, is probably a stretch too far. We also think that these requirements are so demanding that there's likely to be a real drain on the resource that the Information Commissioner already has, and that people will be taken out into other businesses to help deal with this before 2018.
Yeah, I mean, just look at data subject rights, data portability, and the obvious one, right to erasure. I mean, how are you going to police that? How are you going to, if you go to this company and say, I don't want to keep my data anymore, we delete it. How are you going to prove that they deleted it? They'll all have backups and everything of all their data, but you can go back through all their backups and try and delete it out of there as well. But it's going to be virtually impossible to actually do something, prove that it's been done. So a company could go and check out, delete it off the system, and it could just go and restore.
Yeah.
And it's all back again.
Indeed.
Plus the fact as well, you've got all the thing with the fact that they all collect data about what you do and everything, all the things. I mean, when you go to websites, they track what you do on a website, which you read to and everything.
So the guidance around a lot of these requirements includes whatever you do, right? Whatever assessments, whatever judgments you come to, and whatever procedures you have them documented. So that if ever the Information Commissioner needs to come along and start asking some challenging questions, you've got the answers there. And that's the broad guidance that we'd have in place. So in the case of right to erasure, I think it would be reasonable for you to document the procedures that will allow you to comply with that. How is that actually going to happen? And that alone is probably going to create reasonable confidence that should you be asked to do it, it will be done in an appropriate way. But I agree with you, there's a myriad of potential options in there. This is another one that's quite important. I don't know, does anyone work here in a company that would be a processor of personal data on behalf of another company? Yeah, potentially, a couple of nods. So, under the new legislation, processors are now in scope. So, you can actually be penalised, even though it's the data owners, what's the word? Data controller, thank you very much indeed, who are primarily owners and therefore responsible for the personal data. Where there is a service provided and there's a processor of that information, the processor, in the event of breach that they have been involved in, can be held to account by the regulator. Now that doesn't alleviate the controller's responsibilities in any way, shape or form. It just means there's another party that now comes into scope.
How does that go back to your earlier point where the third-party company didn't provide enough security because they were never asked?
Well, exactly. So that's going to mean a whole different ballgame for those companies. A lot of these organisations are now going to have to engage in, activity here, compliance activity that will be completely.
But do they not just go back and say we've got our contract was to supply this and this is what we've done?
Yeah.
The fact they didn't meet their requirements is based on the fact they didn't ask for any requirements.
Well, that's right. So you've got a contractual situation with the customer, but this is law. It's a regulation. They don't have a choice.
Isn't there going to be a temptation just to send everything to Jersey?
Say it again, send everything.
Is there going to be a temptation to host everything in Jersey when it's outside the EU?
Well, potentially, but the thing is, if the data control is based within the EU, we think the legislation is going to apply.
It's still going to apply.
Yeah. And in fact, as you probably know, moving personal data outside the EU is a challenge in itself.
I'm just thinking of Visa. If you look at the addresses you're going through, it's always PayPal or whatever. You go to the States, it's just going straight to the States. It's taking all your personal data.
Indeed.
I don't know whether that's covered by this or not.
Oh, there are specific arrangements in place for that. So you can move data outside the EU, but there are a whole set of specific requirements that you need to meet. I mean,
they've got to have reciprocal.
Yeah, Safe Harbour was the previous one. We've now got Privacy and Shield. It's basically a set of contractual agreements that have to be in place that demonstrate that data is going to be protected.
Difficult to enforce, so as an individual.
Yeah, that's another whole enforcement question again. Anyway, that's all I was going to say on privacy. I thought it was important to mention it tonight. I know that some of your colleagues in our group or chapter, sorry, whatever the correct term is, are going to be seeing this in early November as well. It's important stuff. This really is being taken very seriously, as I mentioned earlier on, by every major commercial organisation and less major ones as well, because it's going to be difficult to comply. There are difficulties that have to be worked through, and as I said at the start, there's the principles are there. The content of the regulation is really clear. It's not up for debate anymore. It's been through all the committees it needs to go through. How it's rolled out in practice is going to be challenging. And I know the Information Commissioner, for example, has people going over to Brussels on a weekly basis engaged in conversations about how this is all going to work in practice and how it's going to be enforced within the UK. So there's a lot more to come on this. What I can tell you is, if you think this should apply to you, your organisation, I would encourage you, if you don't know already, to find out who's in charge, who's running with it. If it's no one, and you think someone needs to be made aware, I would encourage you to do that. But also, some of the companies that we are working with on this know already that the chances of being compliant, fully compliant by May 2018, are almost impossible. There's more to do than you might imagine. When you start exploring it, you start doing all your data mapping, you start working through the various variants of transactions and different processes that you have, you start to realise there's an awful lot more to this to make it work. and to be compliant than you might at first have thought. And there's a lot more to it than a couple of slides. There's a lot of detail that sits behind all of this. And there's a lot for the IT world to do as well, because there are control requirements around how data is controlled and managed and secured that are much more explicit under GDPR than they ever have been in any other data protection legislation. So it's worth paying attention to. We've come to the end. Thank you very much for your participation and for listening for quite so long. Very grateful to you. Thank you.
George in the usual manner.